Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. We see that talks in Geneva led nowhere, and according to information we have, yesterday two European countries imposed sanctions against Ukraine. We are talking about Hungary and we are talking about Slovakia. Hungary has stopped diesel fuel supplies to Ukraine and will not resume them until oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline resumes. That was stated by the foreign minister of Hungary. Another important statement is Slovakia did the same. Slovakia has also stopped exporting diesel fuel to Ukraine, according to the country's Prime Minister Fico. Slovakia provided up to 10% of the diesel fuel supplies to Ukraine, according to the media reports. We know that both countries are allies of the United States of America, so most likely this is the pressure that the United States of America are making against Ukraine. Another important thing is that the European Union is forcing Ukraine to repair the Friendship Druzhba pipeline so that Russia can transport its oil to Europe through it, according to the Sky News. So we see a very interesting situation, very difficult to say whether Zelensky is going to allow this or not, but it seems that he's not going to do this because Zelensky, it seems that he doesn't hear anybody right now. He thinks just about one thing, how to have a meeting, personal meeting with the president of the Russian Federation, Putin. Zelensky stated that we can try to resolve the territorial issue at the level of leaders. That was stated by him yesterday after the end of the Geneva talks. Zelensky wants to hold a direct meeting with Putin to break the deadlock. He believes that the only real breakthrough could come from a personal meeting with Putin and has instructed his team to push for a summit of leaders in Geneva. The thing is that Russian president most likely will never accept this, proposal from the Ukrainian side, and most likely the president of Russia will never have meeting with the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and because the president of Russia, first of all, doesn't want to legitimate Zelensky with this meeting. He believes that Zelensky is no longer a legitimate president of Ukraine, so that is why Putin will not do this. Anyway, right after the end of the talks, the Ukrainians resumed their attacks deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and during the previous day, between the 18th and the morning of the 19th of February of 2026, the Ukrainians launched hundreds of drones in the northern and the northeastern directions of the Russian Federation. This map was published this morning by pro-Ukrainian sources, and here we can see the approximate roads of Ukraine's attack. According to information we have, the Ukrainians used up to 300 drones during this attack. First, the Russians stated that between 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. they managed to bring down 120 drones of the armored forces of Ukraine. And a few hours before, between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., the Russians brought down additional 52 drones. And overnight, the Russians destroyed 113 drones. And as you can see, according to these articles published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, most of them were destroyed over Smolensk and Bryansk regions. Once again, Bryansk region, Bryansk-Smolensk region. So according to this article, according to this picture of drone attack, according to the Minister of Defense, Ukraine's drones were flying in the northern direction through the territory of Bryansk and Smolensk, and this morning we received a report that Ukrainians attacked the Pskov region. The sources reported that Ukrainians attacked oil storage in the eastern part of the settlement by the name of Veliki Luki. So this picture was published this morning. Veliki Luki, Pskov region, strikes were carried out on the refinery and railway line. So very difficult to say what exactly the Ukrainians were trying to destroy by attacking this oil refinery, because this is not the biggest one through the entire territory of the Russian Federation, but for some reason the Ukrainians decided to attack exactly this territory. Maybe it was something like a test attack to check the air defense forces of the armored forces of the Russian Federation in this area. Maybe the Ukrainians attacked this oil refinery, and not just oil refinery, but the Pskov region, because there is residence of the president of the Russian Federation, Valdai, somewhere here in the area of Veliki Novgorod, just several hundred kilometers to the north. Maybe it was something like a message to the president of the Russian Federation, trying to force him to accept the meeting between Zelensky and the president of Russia, Putin. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but the thing is that according to most of the experts, the Russians have already prepared the next attack on the territory of Ukraine. The sources are saying that most likely the Russians will attack objects of energy infrastructure through the city of Kiev. The Russians most likely will attack the territory of Ukraine within the next 48-72 hours, and most likely Russians will use dozens of Iskander missiles and hundreds of drones. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians continue their counterattacks and attacks. So the map, as you can see, has been adjusted significantly. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 18th of February of 2026, and yesterday the Russians reported that they managed to finish the battle for the settlement of Krynichna. And yesterday, if you remember, we adjusted the map. But during the night, pro-Russian sources clarified the situation along the railways between the settlement of Tsvetkova and Ternovate, and according to this picture, the armored force, according to pro-Russian sources, according to different mappers, the armored force of the Russian Federation, as a result of clashes and as a result of a counter-offensive operation that took place between the previous days, the Russians managed to recapture territories they lost during the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. So the Russians are claiming that they managed to recapture the settlement of Kosovtsevo and the settlement of Ternovate. Once again, these are the changes on the ground, and this is the end of the 18th of February, and this is the beginning of the 19th of February of 2026. Furthermore, we have this video where we can see how Ukrainians of different assault brigades were attacking Russians with robots on the territory of the settlement of Ternovate itself. So as you can see, the Ukrainians continue using robots for the ground operation. Ukrainians have huge problems with the infantry, as you may know, so that is why the Ukrainians more often try to use robotic systems to counterattack positions of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. And the settlement of Ternovate is something like a test site for these purposes from the Ukrainian side. Now let's move further. As for the northern direction, during the previous nights, the changes were recorded as well. This is the end of the 18th, and this is the beginning of the 19th of February. Pro-Ukrainian sources expanded the gray zone in this region by adding additional territories to this gray zone, huge gray zone between Ukraine's positions and Russia's positions. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. According to this report, according to this article, the Ukrainians continue infiltration further in the southern direction. We're not saying that these territories were recaptured by Ukrainians. We're just trying to tell that there are more and more Ukrainians are there, and Ukrainians are trying to continue offensive operation further in the southern direction with the purpose to cut the main logistic lines and roads. But it seems that these tactics won't work. Most likely the Russians, after the Russians finish the battle for the railways in the area of Ternovate, the Russians will reinforce their positions in the northern direction, and we believe that in coming hours or days the Russians will launch their own counter-offensive operation with the purpose to restore complete control over the territory. Furthermore, I would like to point to attention that this gray zone doesn't mean that the Ukrainians managed to capture all these territories. There are hundreds of pockets of resistance of the armored force of the Russian Federation through the territory that Ukrainians managed to encircle during the first stage of their counter-offensive operation, but it seems that they won't be able to finish the battle for the territory. At the same time, and meanwhile, the Russians continue attacking the main logistic lines between the northern and the southern banks of the river of Volga, trying to reduce Ukraine's logistic capabilities. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Dobropolye direction, where the Russians also continue their offensive operation. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 18th of February, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 19th of February. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the armored force of the Russian Federation, after the Russians secured the southeastern and the central parts of the settlement of Grishna, began advancing in the northern direction along main tree lines in the direction of the settlement of Shevchenka. It seems that the Russians are trying to encircle the Ukrainians who are currently probably located in this pocket with the purpose to force them to fall back from this area and to begin the battle for the settlement of Shevchenka, which is basically the beginning of the Dobropolye agglomeration. We believe that in coming days, more updates we will receive right exactly from this area. As for the Konstantinovka direction, the third or fourth day in a row we record additional changes on the ground. I would like to remind you that during the previous days we received a report that the Russians managed to improve their positions, basically to break through Ukraine's defense in the southwestern part of the settlement and to take significant number of territories and buildings in the southwestern part of the city. This information was provided by pro-Russian sources mainly, and by the morning of the 19th of February of 2026 we received additional report that right after the Russians finished the battle for the southwestern part of the city, and when the Russians finished the blockade of Ukrainians in this area, the Russians began offensive operation, probably a major offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlements of Roskoshna and Dovga Balka. During the previous night, this information was provided by pro-Russian sources. These are the changes on the ground. As you can see, the Russians are trying to take in pincers the villages of Dovga Balka and Roskoshna from the southwest and from the southeast. Currently, the Russians are fighting for this dense network of the fortifications to the southwest of the settlement, and the Russians are trying to improve their positions along these facilities to the southeast of the village of Dovga Balka. Most likely, the Russians will try first to take these villages under complete control before moving further in the northern direction of the city of Konstantinovka. At the same time, the Ukrainians are trying to bring additional forces and reinforcements to the territory of the settlement of Konstantinovka with the purpose to stabilize the situation in the south, but the Russians attack everything that enters the city of Konstantinovka with drones and with artillery. As for the Slaviansk direction, during the previous night we have just one small update published from the northern part of the settlement of Nikiforovka. Here we can see how Ukrainians attacked positions of the armored forces of the Russian Federation in this area. Based on this video we have adjusted the map, so the Russians, as we can see, are keeping advancing further in the northern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement and to begin battle for the settlement of Alexandrovka. As for the Liman direction, during the previous nights we haven't received anything special. The only thing we have probably is lots of videos of how Ukrainians were continuing sending more and more reinforcements and reserves to the north of the river of Seversky Donets, but the Russians destroyed almost everything on the Ukrainian side of the river of Seversky Donets. As for the northern directions, during the previous 12 hours, probably the most important video we received from the most northeastern part of the Sumy region. Here we can see the moments how exactly the Russians were fighting for the settlement of Kharkivka. I would like to remind you that yesterday the Russians reported that they managed to capture this village, and thus yesterday in the evening we received this video where we can see how sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armored forces of the Russian Federation entered the settlement, which confirms Russian control over the territory. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.